Welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. Today we're going to be taking a look at yet another box set from September 2019. This time round the third box set from the Torchwood prequel series, being Torchwood One, this time round entitled Latter Days. Starring Tracy-Ann Oberman as Yvonne Heartman, alongside Gareth David Lloyd as Torchwood's one and only Yanto Jones, as well as Timothy Benedict as the Big Finish regular, being of course Tommy. Now previously on the channel I have already reviewed the previous two box sets within this series, being Before the Fall and Machines, so I do certainly recommend checking out those reviews in case you haven't already, and I have thoroughly enjoyed this series so far. Of course, if you are a fan of the Big Finish reviews that I do on this channel, you will know that I very rarely dip into Torchwood, and this is in fact the only series that I listen to upon release. I have jumped onto the main range here and there, however I've never really reviewed it, or I've never really been a dedicated listener to that series. So this series is certainly a great jumping on point for Torchwood fans who haven't bought the previous box sets or main range releases that Big Finish have released over the past few years. First off, and as always, in the description below there will be the link to go and buy its release from the Big Finish website. It is currently out now. The physical box set is $19.99 and the download is $16.99, and of course after a few months this will be going up to the standard recommended retail price of, I do believe, around £25. Naturally, if you're also interested by what I say throughout this review, you can also check out the trailer as well as all the story information on the Big Finish website. However, on a slightly unrelated note, before we get onto the actual review itself, as you will be able to tell, we are back at university in a rather similar looking location to last year. This is in fact an entirely different room, however it is just flipped from the last time, so I did of course go home for summer, and now we are back at university again. Therefore, for the most part, the reviews such as this, covering the most recent Big Finish releases, will of course be getting filmed and created in this accommodation, of course back in Newcastle. However, over the summer I have also pre-recorded a little bit of content back at Hosty HQ, which will of course be popping onto the channel on occasion, so you will see occasional glimpses here and there. However, for the most part, the majority of content will now be filmed here once again. However, of course, even though I am at university, I do intend to upload just as normal as I would normally do back at home. Therefore, there will still be regular Doctor Who content, hopefully uploaded every single week. Taking a look at how this box set pans out, once again we do have a further 3 episodes within the Torchwood One series. This time round they've decided to not go with a plot arc or anything like that. However, they have decided to go with 3 stories that almost have a interlocking theme, almost like a plot arc or a theme that is spread throughout all 3 of the stories, however aren't directly related. So the first episode is Retirement Plan, as written by Gareth David Lloyd, of course Yanto Jones himself. Episode 2 is Lock 15, as written by Matt Fitton, and the final episode of the box set is The Rockery, as written by Tim Foley. Production credits for this box set: the sound design has been created by Steve Foxton and Ian Meadows, with additional theme music by Ben Foster and the theme music itself by Murray Gold. The cover art has been created by Lee Binding, the director as per usual is Barnaby Edwards, the executive producers are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery. The general music itself has been created by Blair Mowat, and the producer and script editor are both James Goss. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first episode of the box set, which is of course Retirement Plan, as written by Gareth David Lloyd. I think that to start with, I'm really happy that they've got Gareth David Lloyd back to actually do another Big Finish Torchwood story, because previously he has done Blind Summit within the Torchwood One series. I think that he has also written a Torchwood main range episode with him and Owen. I think that so far from what I've seen from his writing, he understands Yanto incredibly well, which is understandable considering that he has played him for years now, but also at the same time his way of presenting character and emotion is incredibly intriguing to listen to, and this story is a perfect example of that. So very much like how we got within Blind Summit, we had a story focused entirely around Yanto, which was perfect and brilliant. However, what I'm really happy to see within this story is that we don't have that focus on Yanto, but instead Gareth is using his writing talents to portray emotion and a backstory to that of Tommy, a Big Finish Torchwood character that is absolutely brilliant, by far one of my favourite Torchwood members ever, simply because he is so different from all the others that we've seen so far. He's a character that is very much living within the past. He's quite funny, but also at the same time his opinions of things are rather dated, and it does make for a rather funny thing to listen to, it has to be said, especially when you're working within this corporation that is so focused around the future certain alien developments and things like that. And I think that for the opening story of this box set, this one is in fact very experimental, and I think that it's a perfect way to open the series, because we get to see this idea of retirement and essentially Tommy's fear of retiring after Torchwood. He doesn't want to be one of these people who works for Torchwood for all of these years, doing these amazing things, then one day he's going to wake up and he's going to believe that he has done this substandard, normal human job for many, many years, and instead he's just an everyday human. He wants to keep those memories, he wants to have control over his own mind and his own body and what happens to it after Torchwood. And in this story we see him coming up with this rather unusual and wacky project idea in order to sustain him after Torchwood, in order to keep him alive in this system by his own means as opposed to other people's rules such as retcon and wiping his memory. We get to see Yanto and Tommy basically go into this mental world that he has created within this machine called El Cielo, which is basically everything that he has wanted. It is this lovely hot climate where he can go and be healthy, he has a wife and he has these children. However, naturally, because it is Tommy that has made it, it does have a number of different flaws, such as the different people who are working within this perfect world having the faces of different Torchwood recruits. There is this office character of John who is basically gave every other standard job to within this unusual world, so everybody and anyone is John from Torchwood. So we have his children who are John, we have the waitresses in this mental cafe that are John, and we also have his wife, who just so happens to be Yvonne Heartman, in this rather unusual portrayal using this rather mad and over-the-top accent. And I think it's just generally a story that is a lot of fun. But most excitingly about this episode, yes, it is a lot of fun, it does have an absolute ton of laugh out loud moments. I couldn't help but laugh throughout listening to this story. It is an emotionally uplifting episode and one that I would listen to cheer me up. But rather interestingly, this whole concept of retirement and life deterioration from Tommy's perspective is in fact very depressing. We get this brilliant scene where he says about his personal life and how a marriage that he was once in has been completely ruined by him working for Torchwood, and how he doesn't want that to happen anymore, and how he has given so much to Torchwood and this is what he's going to get out of the other side, essentially nothing, and he questions if life is worth it. And I think that Timothy Benedict's portrayal of that is incredibly hard-hitting, very emotional, very powerful, but also at the same time it is supported by these absolutely brilliant jokes from both Timothy as well as Gareth, which makes the episode, as I said, generally overall not too bleak but a lot of fun to listen to, having this world where Yanto is also living in this dream state of mind where he is basically an equivalent of James Bond, living in this cinematic universe with explosions, fast cars and women around him. It's all a little bit mad and over the top and theatrical, but a lot of fun at the same time, and a brilliant way to start off this box set, and by far probably in fact one of my favourite Torchwood stories that I've ever listened to, especially considering that I like Tommy, and if you like Tommy as a character then this episode is certainly for you. It is almost compulsory listening because it is completely focused around him, and to be honest, I recommend this box set alone for this story because it is so good and so brilliant and light-hearted but hard-hitting at the same time, which I think is the brilliant thing about Gareth's writing. It is incredibly versatile to suit many different situations, and you never really get a run-of-the-mill story from him. It certainly has a lot of personality. This, most importantly, will be an episode that I remember. And then we move on to the second episode of the box set, being Locker 15, as written by Matt Fitton, and it is an absolutely perfect parallel from episode 1, which I presume is intentional, because you have the whole idea of what Tommy was fearing within the previous story almost made a reality, as we get to meet a character called Dave, who previously worked for Torchwood in a rather minor role, such as a cleaner or somebody who just goes around making sure that everything is okay, and we get to see him in his later life, now retired in an old people's home where his memory is incredibly fuzzy, and due to him being a cleaner he knows where lots of different things are, and one particular thing of interest to Yvonne and the rest of Torchwood is a locker, in particular Locker 15 from the basement of Canary Wharf, as there is something emanating from the inside and causing a threat to not just Torchwood but the entirety of London as a whole, and they do not quite know what is within this locker as they cannot open open it regardless of what weapons they throw at it. And we get to see them visit Dave within this old people's home, trying to coax this information out of him. And I think that it is a very bleak story because we get to see a very accurate portrayal of this whole idea of corporate businesses and what people do for these corporate businesses, and then at the end of the day, everybody is just disposable. They can fire you when they want to, and they can also, if in the case of Torchwood, they can wipe your memory and leave you at the side of the road to essentially deteriorate for the rest of your life. And I think that, as I say, it's a perfect parallel from episode 1 and kind of supporting the fears that Tommy had. And the great thing about this story is that Dave is such a brilliant focus. He's played by Derek Griffiths. I really love that we get to see this older version of him essentially in his wheelchair being carted around Torchwood, and also at the same time that is supported by additional context of flashbacks to him actually working for Torchwood in the late 1990s. We get to see him in his main area of employment, and almost this is what he was and this is what he is now. And I think that if anything, to make this story a little bit better, it would have been nice to maybe have a 50-50 split between the two, have the past 1990s version of Torchwood, and then that being supported by the modern day version of Torchwood, and having a story play out between the two different time periods, as opposed to almost having the flashbacks as an occasional novelty here and there. Because out of the story as a whole, I certainly preferred those flashbacks because they allowed to have a much more dated look at Torchwood, but also at the same time supported Derek from this later half of life that we are seeing now being deteriorating and old, as opposed to what he was a number of years ago. Once again, if you are a fan of Doctor Who and Aliens and Alien Invasion, this story may not be for you, because very much like episode 1, it is focused solely around the idea of emotions and the human relationship between businesses and corporations. I think if you are a fan of Aliens, then this story may be a little bit of a boring one. However, at the same time, I think that it is a very well written story from the emotional perspective. There is an alien within this story, however, they don't really have too much importance, and I think that if anything, it would have been nice to maybe see the alien developed a little bit further, but I'm aware that if they did do that, it may have in fact taken away from the emotional and personal plot a little bit more. So I suppose it's kind of weighing up, what would I have rather seen, the emotional stuff or the alien side of things? And I think that in the context of this box set as a whole, the personal experiences of Torchwood are kind of more important and integral to the box set's theme, as opposed to alien invasion and alien weapons that we have seen in fact quite a lot of really throughout the other Torchwood series. So I suppose I praise this box set for being a little bit more unique compared to the others. My favourite scene in this episode is in fact once again near the very end. I'm not going to explain what actually happens, but once again for me it basically proved why Torchwood is Torchwood and why it is independent from Doctor Who. Because with Doctor Who we get this whole obsession with everything is happy, the Doctor will save the day, blah blah blah, and it's all a little bit too happy and too positive, especially with a new series Doctor Who. Torchwood gets the idea and throws it out the window immediately, and the last scene within this story is adult in the way that it has been done. However, at the same time, very well written from Matt Fitton's perspective. I think it also made sense within the context of the story, so I do praise him for what he did within the later half of this episode, once again solely for the adult listeners as opposed to the younger listeners. I suppose, come to think of it, the end of this story does also include a very nice jumping on point to that of the series finale, because the ending moments of this episode do start to raise questions about Yvonne and her relationship with the rest of the Torchwood team, and what she does and what she presents to the Torchwood team to give the impression of power. However, we don't really get the idea of what she's actually thinking deep down and how this is affecting her emotionally, and within the final scene of this story, we do maybe get a slight suggestion of it kind of taking its toll on Yvonne. However, at the end of the day, and probably the main idea that it is trying to show, is that regardless, no matter what, even if you work for Torchwood and you have for many, many years, they don't really take any prisoners and they will get rid of you when they want to. And now we move on to the third and final episode of this box set, being The Rockery, as written by Tim Foley. Now previously within this box set, of course, episode 1 was a character piece focused around Tommy as a person. Then we had Blind Summit within the previous box set, focusing around Ianto. The third and final episode of this box set only really makes sense to be a character piece focused around Yvonne, as well as the other Heartmans, in particular Anne Heartman being her mother. And this story is kind of the most disconnected disconnected from Torchwood I think I've ever really seen Torchwood One go, because we don't really get to see Canary Wharf, we get a very small cameo from Yanto, and we don't get anything from Tommy whatsoever. Instead, this episode is entirely focused around Yvonne going to see her mother, who is now in a very secluded, quiet cottage in the middle of Shropshire, and Anne is a character that has once again retired. She's in later life, covering the theme of this box set, but also at the same time we get to see Yvonne's kind of interpretation of Anne from her perspective. We get to see her trying to cope with the idea of later life, and it makes for a very strong character piece, not only for Yvonne but also Anne Heartman, considering that from what I can recall, or from what I know, we've never in fact seen Anne within any previous Torchwood stories. However, even though this episode is only 1 hour long, I feel like we got to have a great representation of her character, and by the very end I felt like I knew her as a person. I think that Tim Foley wrote the entirety of the cast incredibly well. It is pretty much a free-hander between Yvonne, the character called William, as well as Anne, all being in this cottage together in a very lonely part of England. I think that considering the theme of this box set, it makes for a perfect way to end it. I think that one of the best parts about this story in context to Yvonne is that she is such a powerful and private character, where we don't really know much about her personally, and this story basically goes completely against that, and we get to see her personal life. We kind of, this whole idea of alien technology is completely beyond her, and we get to see Yvonne bring a plant to her cottage that she wants her to look after, to essentially take her mind off things, and we get to see once again some very adult yet necessary themes represented throughout this story. I really do praise Tim Foley for the way that he in fact represented mental health, because we have had a number of stories in the past that have represented the idea of mental health within the Doctor Who universe. However, it skirts around it. In fact, one of the most recent Rose Tyler Dimension canon stories does exactly that. It skirts around the idea, however, still suggests it ever so slightly. Torchwood decides to hit the nail on the head and basically address the issue, and we tackle this whole idea that due to the passing of Yvonne's father, Anne is now depressed and she is suffering in life, and she is wanting to find a way forward, however is struggling to do so. And she meets a character called William, who is her next door neighbour, and we get to see a series of different interactions between them, nudging him away, then bringing him a little bit closer, then nudging him away again, and we get to see that difficulties within her life within this time period, and her trying to cope with herself mentally, when really all she wants is somebody to talk to, but she can't quite realise it because of how she is in this frame of mind. Once again, in a very similar way to that of the previous story, this episode ends in such a heartbreaking way. It pulls the rug of illusion from underneath your feet and basically creates an entirely new level of emotion when it comes to experiencing this story, because you start the episode thinking it's going to be a rather basic character piece, and then it starts to rip away at the layers ever so slightly, revealing more and more aspects of the plot, and then towards the very end it once again creates very hard-hitting drama, especially within the context of the time period that we are currently in within the Torchwood One timeline. It just affects you in a way, at least to me, that was very hard-hitting and something that I didn't expect whatsoever, and it kind of made the things represented throughout this story even more powerful because of the time that it is set within. Very much like the previous Torchwood One box sets, there is a number of different references to new series Doctor Who, in particular 2005 and 2006, to kind of get a suggestion of where this takes place within the timeline and kind of during the events of Doctor Who Series 2, which I did thoroughly appreciate, and once again kind of made it feel like it was included within the Doctor Who universe, because really the only Doctor Who-y thing about Torchwood One is some of the characters that they've been in Doctor Who, and other than that, I think that Torchwood One has done a very good job of establishing itself as almost a series in its own right. It feels disconnected from Doctor Who because of almost how adult it is and the themes that it is trying to tackle. So for that reason, I really do respect this box set, because the overarching theme itself made sense. It was really nicely included throughout all three of the stories, and all of them were different, because when you have a box set that has one theme that is seen throughout throughout each story, it can get a little bit samey after a while. However, all three of the stories did something different and made for a very interesting listen, which you could very easily get done within one evening, which I did during Freshers Week of my first week back at uni, because that's how social I am. Listening to an entire Big Finish box set within one evening, because why go out clubbing when you could listen to Big Finish? So yeah, overall for Torchwood One Latter Days, I certainly recommend this one if you have purchased the previous two box sets within this series, because no doubt if you enjoyed those box sets, this box set features exactly the same characters, and you basically get further expansion of all of them personally. And I think that this box set is a rather nice one to end the series on, because it's all about retirement, and we've almost had Torchwood tackling the aliens in the second box set being machines, and then we had the introductory box set being Before the Fall, which kind of allowed somebody to step into Torchwood for the first ever time. So we've kind of gone through the entirety of a career at Torchwood, which does bring me to the question of, where are they going to put this series next? Is that it? Is that going to be the last box set for Torchwood 1? Who particularly knows? Because I think it is one of these series where it can't go on forever, and if it did, it would make the series less effective. And the thing about Big Finish is, the worrying thing is they need to know when to stop, because they could very easily continue every single spin-off for as long as they want to. And I think that certainly with series such as this and the War Master, they need to know when enough is enough and when to draw the line. And I think that for that reason, maybe this should be it for Torchwood 1 as a box set series. However, I would certainly love to see Tommy especially incorporated into the Torchwood main range, and I would definitely like to see some of the early days of Yvonne within the main range as well, or maybe even a Victorian Torchwood box set. I know that they've had a few inclusions within the main range and a few suggestions here and there. However, of course, we've not had a box set dedicated to that as of yet. I do quite like Victorian era London, as you probably of course know due to me absolutely adoring Jago Lightfoot, or I think a Torchwood Victorian box set would certainly be something that would be worth seeing at some point. But other than that, who knows, maybe this is the end of a Torchwood 1, but I think it's so far been a thoroughly enjoyable series, and if you've been a fan of the previous box sets, I definitely recommend listening to this one. And that said as well, if you've not listened to the previous box sets, then you could probably buy this one and actually not need additional context, so that's good, and once again a rarity for Big Finish box sets. So thank you very much for watching this review. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions about Torchwood 1 Latter Days, please do leave them in the comments section below, and I will of course reply to them at some point in the near future. And do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for more Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama reviews every single month. And of course on that note, I will see you all next time. Bye for now.